Does emotional labour and service work promote gendered occupational segregation? I'm Emily.
I'm Josie.
I'm Susannah. And I'm Bav.
What is emotional labour? Emotional labour is the requirement of a job that employees display required emotions towards consumers. Emotional labour refers to the process by which workers are expected to manage their feelings in accordance with organisationally defined rules and guidelines. A large proportion of the research surrounding emotional labour recognises it as taking part in the service sector, where jobs are highly gender segregated. Using practical examples of job roles, we look to explore the rationality of the claim that emotional labour in service work promotes gendered occupational segregation with support of proven statistics. Gender in the workplace has seen many changes over the coming years. The Equal Pay Act was brought into action in 1970 to ensure equal treatment for men and women in terms of pay and conditions of employment. Before 1970, it was common practice in the private sector and some parts of the public sector for there to be a lower pay rate for women. Prior to the 1970, Ford Motor Company had 4 grades of pay for production workers: male skilled, male semi-skilled, male unskilled, and female. The females worked as sewing machinists and were paid less than the men, including the male toilet cleaners and the store workers. The Sex Discrimination Act was brought into place in 1975 to protect men and women against discrimination on the grounds of sex or marital status. Although these laws attempt to create an equal playing field for men and women, it has not managed to diminish the gender stereotypes linked to particular jobs, especially those involving emotional labour. This graph shows the dominated jobs by women. All of these jobs dominated by women are in the emotional labour sector.
Gender work and organisation. Gender work and organisation remains an abundant area of study with increasing interest since the 1980s. Gender has become a scholarly term, changing from sex, which usually refers to biology, to the term gender, which focuses more on the social dynamics. Achieving equality at work remains unresolved, as many authors previously have been silent on the topic of gender, implying that people are to use objective logic when hiring and firing employees, which leads to gender being delegitimised as an issue. Acker and Van Houten were one of the first to make gender apparent, arguing that workers have a gender and this is used as a method of control by management. Acker's work triggered the expansion of a large amount of research into the embodied worker within organisations. Gender has changed from being a fixed status to something that's variable and constantly evolving and shaped through interactions, and has become inherent within organisational culture. Discrimination towards women throughout the world is still a devastating issue. Discriminatory laws against women still remain in all corners of the globe, with many countries still preventing women from voting, driving, dressing how they want, and purchasing their own property. Trafficking is still a major problem in countries such as Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Changes in legislation attempting to allow equal treatment at work for everyone has led to a disparity between the ideals and reality. Women continue to face oppression at work regardless of these changes. Worryingly, regardless of the fact that women work 2/3 of the world's working hours and produce half of the world's food, they still earn only 10% of the world's income and own less than 1% of the world's property. Fransway, the author of Making Feminist Politics, focused on gendered discourse and undertook a study looking at the challenges faced by women and men in the trade union movement. This book made powerful steps in making the relationships between feminism and unionism visible, specifically looking at women's invisibility, emotional labour, and the uneven demand of family life. Women are often expected to work a double shift, but giving their attention to both the union and family. Trade unions are greedy institutions, a sociological concept developed by Lewis Coss's describing organisations that require undivided attention from their members and employees. Other examples include the military, universities and religious groups such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, who are expected to give full commitment from their members, including a high level of separation from worldly affairs. As with many other organisations, union activist work hours are usually situated as being gender neutral, not accounting for the women who have dual demands with union work and putting in the equal hours of their responsibilities at home. Women often negotiate their own terms to account for this, such as employing others for childcare, limiting the number of children they have, and unfortunately, cutting back on the time they use to care for themselves. Professor Gillian Robinson of the University of Ulster stated that gender inequalities in all areas are rooted in social structures, but also in attitudes. Although women are working increasing number of hours, they are still expected to do the majority of the housework and caring for the family. Until their menfolk begin to shoulder the burden of the housework, women will continue to struggle to achieve equal opportunities at work. The work of a union worker, such as eating, resting and cleaning, in order to prepare for work, is introduced as a concept by Franzway labelled the labouring body. Before the Industrial Revolution, the nation was engaged in agricultural work. Men, women and children all had to contribute to food production in the home. The women cared for the smaller animals, such as pigs and chickens, and dealt with household tasks, but the men dealt with the larger cattle and did the mowing and ploughing. The arrival of industrialism changed the way the gender division of labour was structured, as the increase in factory production led to men going into paid and market work. Changes in legislation have been implemented to encourage a change from the top positions in the public centre in the UK from being predominantly white, able-bodied men. Police work involves a substantial amount of emotional labour by officers who have to control their own displays of emotion when dealing with other officers and citizens. If they let their emotions take over too much, it can be seen as a sign of weakness and they lose some authority. Police work is often viewed as stereotypically masculine work, as they have to have a commanding presence and remain in control in unpredictable situations. Before 1910, there were no women in the workforce, but in 1910, 5 women got together as a group and started to draw attention of the police authorities to the fact that there were no women constables. It wasn't until 1918 that the first women constables were established. Without a doubt, the Sex Discrimination Act and the Equal Pay Act are in large measure responsible for the promotion of women in police forces. Despite the number of initiatives pushing for a higher representation of women in the police, there are still a low number of women in leadership ranks. Women are still perceived as the outsiders within the masculine organisation. There's been a huge debate over the lack of diversity within the police leadership, as historically, policing has been represented predominantly by white males. In July 2011, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, expressed concerns that the system for producing police leaders was too closed, and that candidates applying for the top hierarchical jobs are few and similar. He declared the need for a radical change to diversify top leadership and give more people the opportunity to apply. The lack of diversity among chief police officers is particularly important in order to be representative of the population. A representative police force can have symbolic benefits that enlarge the overall status of a police department. It can help to reduce the perception that certain actions are based on radical profiling, such as stops and searches. Statistics indicate that, alarmingly, only 16.3% of women officers are located in the ranks of Chief Inspector or above within England and Wales. And this isn't limited to England and Wales either. There is nowhere where women make up 50% of officers. In the above image, it describes the proportion of female police officers in the 43 forces across England and Wales. It is evident that the number of female officers has increased in recent years from 22.3% in 2016 to 28.2% in 2015. It's obvious that females are making significant steps in the organisation, but there is still a long way to go until the force fully represents the diverse community they serve, with 51% being female. Even though women police were becoming more accepted, they still have a different role than men. Dealing primarily with women and children, women police were involved in patrol work, especially in parks and open spaces, escort duty, looking after juvenile and female prisons, and hospital duty. In the mid-1970s, occupational segregation was perfectly legal, with female officers having a separate rank structure within their own departments. Women were often located in a separate part of the building, with their own officers and changing facilities, and a distinct segregated set of tasks to carry out. Still, before 1973, women officers received only 90% of men's pay. Things did change though, and now almost a quarter of police officers in England are female. So it's obvious, even though there are still less women in the force, that gender inequality has reduced massively throughout the years.
I'm going to talk about the occupational segregation in the healthcare industry between doctors and nurses. If you see a picture of a man and a woman, both dressed in scrubs, your first reaction is probably to assume that the man is a doctor and the woman is a nurse. Why is this? As I mentioned before, gender is a deeply embedded social construct. From this, it stems From this stems the idea of femininity and masculinity in relation to females and males. In the article Occupational Cultures and Embodiment of Masculinity, female critics argue that the components of the mind and body have meshed, and by mind and body, I mean the split between your physical body and your inner masculinity and femininity traits. By meshing this, it created a gender hierarchy that links culture and intellect with masculinity and nature, and the body with femininity. The profession of doctors has a requirement of masculinity traits, and therefore is seen as a male profession. And that women who are doctors must possess those masculinity traits of professionalism and intellect. This is vice versa for nurses. It requires you to be caring and nurturing, which are the alleged female traits. Therefore, a female job, or a male who possesses those female traits. From the gender hierarchy created by society, it develops stereotypes. For male nurses, general stereotypes include male nurses are gay, you're not masculine enough to be a doctor, why a nurse, not a doctor? We might not even realise, but these stereotypes came from the way we were taught in society from a young age. As children, it was normal for boys to play with action mans portraying the heroic and powerful figures associated with masculinity, whereas girls were encouraged to play with dolls, portraying the soft and caring traits of femininity. These stereotypes is often portrayed on TV shows and in movies as well, which encourages people to degrade male nurses.
Teachers partake in emotional labour as it requires for them to have different qualities, such as being caring. The qualities necessary in a teacher are often thought to be stereotypical female traits. The stereotype of females having the more caring role in society is one that has been apparent throughout history. In the early days of the 20th century, it was typical for a married woman to stay home and look after the children, while the men were the breadwinners of the family. The women were considered to be better at looking after the children and caring roles than men. In 2013, 87% of primary school teachers were female, showing that females clearly are stereotyped to have the better caring role.
To a certain extent, to segregate specific genders in regards to jobs could be considered as the remains of a world where men are superior to women, prior to the late 1900s, and the fact there is still to this day movement towards a more gender equal and mutual living and working environment. Like any gendered subject, whether it be rights, pay or occupational segregation, it is a highly debatable subject. Although there are women that are not being notified for their capabilities and authoritative nature, such as only 755 out of 1,727 managers being female, with discussion regarding women being unable to make a harsh final decision to dismiss an employee due to their emotional and committed natures and their supposed fear of feelings and notions of guilt and worrying about the implications to that individual losing their job. But it's clear that there is not enough current research that has been taken out, as there is emotional men within managing roles just as there are stern women. It is important to mention that although the male to female manager ratio is very imbalanced, we do not know the statistics for each position of how many applicants were each gender. It may just be a case of less women are applying for the high pressure jobs and not a case that less women are in fact adequate for the position. So in regard to teaching, it could be considered that gendered occupational segregation is merely a fabricated social construct that women are placing their children in the hands of other mother figures, but is a commonly acknowledged aspect that male teachers are just as adequate of the job. From personal experiences of high school and other education, there were just as many stern male teachers as there were female, and it was never recognised that either female or male teachers did their job better. Teaching again is a good example of gendered occupational segregation, as although there seems to be more teachers that are in fact female, it would not be uncommon for in some schools for there to be more males. This could be associated to the blandness of the title of teacher, not really being associated to either gender, whereas for example nurse seems to carry a female presence, although there are in fact many males within that line of work. So to consider every aspect of the job roles discussed and other that come to mind, it is hard to justify any element of gendered occupational segregation as justifiable, as it is hard to prove without testing that man or woman is in fact better for the opposing gender.